Hello, and welcome to Just One More Things tutorials. Today I'm going to show you kind of a technique, a quick technique that makes doing linen stitch a little bit easier. Um, if you've never done linen stitch before, I'm going to zoom in a little bit and you can kind of see the piece that I'm working on. So linen stitch is basically a knit one, slip one with yarn in front is the pattern. Um, on the next row, you're going to knit the stitches that were slipped previously and slip the stitches that were knit previously, and that'll make more sense when you see it done. But it creates this really fun kind of V with a bar over the top patterning. It makes a thick, flat, a really nice flat piece of fabric. And I'm using it in a cowl that I'm designing, and this is the swatch that I'm working on. So before I get started, a couple of caveats. I knit left-handed, and when I thought, oh, I should do this tutorial, I didn't want to have to start over with a new piece knitting it right-handed. So you're gonna kind of feel like everything's backwards when you watch me do this. I'm gonna be working in this direction across the stitches instead of the normal way that right-handed people do it. I'm also basically doing a swatch. I'll zoom back out again so you can kind of see. I'm doing a swatch in the round. So all these kind of loose pieces of threads that you see back here is me carrying the yarn around so that I can always work from the front every single time like you would if you were in the round. It's kind of a quicker, easier way to do swatching in the round than it is to actually cast on enough stitches to get around your needle. So those are just a couple of things. That I'm also doing a 3-color linen stitch, which is why it's kind of a little bit more modeled than other linen stitch patterns that you might have seen that only use 1 or 2 colors. So hopefully this kind of makes sense as I'm doing it, and maybe will help you in your own linen stitch. I don't know of a way to do this with throwing yarn, which is a more the English style of knitting. So this is also kind of only useful for continental knitters, and I apologize for those in advance that I'm not able to show you a way to do it if you're an English style thrower. And I'll put all of that in the description, so hopefully you're not watching this and thinking, well, that was a waste of my time, I can't knit that way. I think it'll make sense for you to switch this over to a right-handed knitter just as easily, even though you're kind of watching me do it backwards. So I'm going to get started with, I kind of have a selvage edge here of garter stitch to kind of keep my swatch flat. So ignore these first 3 stitches, and I'm going to try to zoom in again so you can see better what I'm doing with my hands. When I'm doing these in the round swatches, I always twist my first stitch. It kind of keeps the edges neater and the yarn from moving around too much and getting messy on those edges. So I'm just going to purl these next couple of stitches. Okay, so here's the beginning of my linen stitch. And this first one, I'll show you a couple of stitches the way I normally do it. I usually move my finger back and forth like this. So this would be a slip stitch with the yarn in front, knit, slip with yarn in front, knit, slip with yarn in front. That gets old really fast, that moving your finger back and forth. It, especially if you have like arthritis or something, it can get really tedious really quick, which means that some people just kind of avoid this stitch altogether, even though it makes such a pretty fabric. So instead, what I do is I just constantly hold my yarn to the back of the work and I tension it with my middle finger, and then I use my index finger to move the stitches along. So I've slipped, this is a knit stitch, so we're just going to knit it like normal. But now for this slip stitch, what I'm going to do is I'm going to swoop back here and pick up that yarn and slip the stitch, which kind of might look, if you're used to doing brioche knitting, you know, yarning, making the yarn over for a slip stitch, it's kind of that same motion. But instead of leaving that yarn over there, we're just gonna gently pop it to the front. We're gonna knit a stitch. So we're gonna pick up the yarn and slip our stitch and move the stitch off the needle and then pop that yarn to the front before we do our knit stitch. It's a lot less movement. It's a lot easier on your joints, and it speeds up your work considerably, not having, because you're not moving your hands as much. Let me see if I can get this in frame better so you can see it kind of at speed. So for these next few stitches, I'll slow it down a little bit again. This, you can kind of tell when you're working this, you can see that this stitch here had been knit already, and this one is the one that was slipped because that yarn, the bar of yarn's in front of it, and it kind of pulls down a little bit. So I know that's the one I need to knit this time. And this is the one that I'm going to slip. So I swoop back and grab that yarn. I pull the stitch off the needle, and then I just pop the yarn back so that it's in front. I hope that helped maybe ease some of your linen stitch knitting technique. Makes it a little bit easier on your hands and a little bit faster. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. I'd be happy to help. Happy knitting!